Welcome to the Midtown Scholar again on a rainy Sunday afternoon. It's nice to see so many people out. This is the second in our weekend Harrisburg History Series. We had an amazing event yesterday talking about the 40th anniversary of the Harrisburg 7 trial. And there was an interesting piece in the paper this morning, if you haven't seen it, by the head of the Selective Service at the time, talking about a bomb threat to the federal building and all sorts of interesting things that was published this morning. He came to the event. We had original witnesses. We had Elizabeth McAllister, wife of Philip Berrigan. It was quite an event, and that will be up on our website, midtownscholar.com, as a podcast this week, along with this panel. Part of what we're doing is trying to record aspects of Harrisburg's recent history, at least within the last 40 years, in an effort to create a sort of oral history, living history project here at the bookstore. This is our largest, most distinguished panel ever, so this will take a little coordination on our part. But the general plan is we're going to let the lawyers begin, Reizdan and Steve Schiffman. Then we're going to have, we now are up to 6 of the original 13 plaintiffs here, all of whom can share an aspect of their story with you. I may follow up with some specific questions, and then we'll move to audience questions. I have the mobile mic, so I will bring the mic to you. If you have a question, just raise your hand, and remember to speak into the mic. That way we'll be able to record it for posterity, which is really our number one goal. Now, there are really 2 lawsuits under discussion today. It is, of course, the 20th anniversary of Bishop v. Reed, and that's where most of the plaintiffs are associated with that case. However, there would have been no Bishop v. Reed without the prior case of Moore v. Reed. And we're very lucky today to have attorney Reizdan Moore here to talk about that case. Reizdan came to Harrisburg in 1978 after law school and worked for Speaker K. Leroy Irvis as assistant parliamentarian. He was elected to council in 1978. He served 8 years, and he was part of the original Reed team. He chaired the Community Development Committee for 2 years, and then he served as president of City Council for 6 years. He's worked for the House of Representatives for more than 30 years, serving as caucus chief counsel, parliamentarian, and now House counsel under the Bipartisan Management Committee. As a personal note, Reizdan for many years owned the building next door to us. And ironically, perhaps, the building on the other side of us was owned by Judge Kleinfeld. And so they have a direct connection right here to the bookstore in this part of Midtown. Would you please welcome Reizdan Moore.
All right. Can you hear me? Okay, I'll try to speak up a little bit. Good evening, first of all. It's my pleasure to be here. Just a slight correction to the bio. I did come here in '78. I think I was elected to council in 1981. It's the only change. I want to take you back to Harrisburg that I encountered pre-1981. At the time, I also became very involved with the Central Alston Hill Community Organization, which operated between Market Street and State Street up on the hill, from roughly Royal Terrace out to about 23rd Street. So we got involved in neighborhood development and working a lot with the city. In pre-1981, Harrisburg was essentially a ghost town after 5 o'clock. There was stores downtown. There was Pomeroy's, Doutrick Men's Store, the Spot Hot Dogs, but that was pretty much it. There was no real commercial downtown development. You also had the remaining effects of the Agnes housing blight, and we were working with the Community Development Block Grant Funds to try to improve the housing stock in the city. And the administration at that time, before 1981, had all kinds of problems. We reached a point where the federal government froze our Community Development Block Grant Funds. So we essentially had at that time a very ineffective city government. Salvation was looming on the horizon in the form of young Stephen R. Reed, Stephen Russell Reed. Steve Reed was the wonder kid. He had been, when he was in high school, he decided he was going to be mayor. He had been very active in establishing the Young Democrats. Steve has succeeded in knocking off a longtime state representative, George Geekas. So again, Steve, the Wonder Kid, was doing everything. He succeeded in getting elected to the Dauphin County Commissioners, and then he decided to run for mayor in the midst of all of these problems. He was not the endorsed candidate. He ran against the endorsed candidate, and again, the Wonder Kid, Steve Reed, beat him. So we went into the November election taking on the Republican team at that time, and there was the Wonder Kid and his council team. I was a part of that council team. The issues that we were dealing with, though, were control of downtown development, which at that time was being led by Harristown Development Corporation. It has succeeded in getting Strawberry Square built. And everyone understood that we had a quote-unquote strong mayor form of government. I think that concept was and still is misunderstood. Harrisburg operates under the optional charter plan, Plan A, which is a mayor-council form of government as opposed to a government where the mayor is just part of council. But for the young mayor coming in, the strong mayor form of government meant a number of things. It meant that now we were going to have all the decisions, development in downtown, all the decisions about housing made by a mayor who with strength and energy and vision would move the city forward. I note that David Unkovic, before his departure, described Harrisburg as suffering from 20 years of mismanagement. Steve was elected for 28 years, and I'm not sure what he had in mind, but I like to think that that first council, which served for 4 years overall, involving Bill Robinson, Jane Perkins, Calvin Gilchrist, myself, Harry Braxton, part of the original Reed team, except for Harriet, that we were not part of that mismanagement. The second group came along, which I call the Reed Team 2, and it had 3 lawyers on it, Lenore Smith, Stanley Mitchell, myself, plus Calvin Gilchrist, who was working on his master's in business administration. During that time, we had lots of disagreements with Steve Reed, but we tried to maintain the city moving forward. We recognized we would not always agree on everything, but we tried to move in the best interest of the city, put our personalities aside, and reach some kind of compromise, which I think we succeeded in doing for 8 years. Steve Reed didn't quite agree with that. If you disagree with him, then he tended to take it personally. The Moore versus Reed lawsuit, that was a lawsuit that was filed after the decision was made by council, which was sick and tired of repeated 11th minute must-do bond approvals, and everything had to be done at the last minute. And then we had Mayor Reed's refusal to cooperate on even the simplest things. Everything was a fight with him. We had a refusal to cooperate on small issues as well as big issues. Water system upgrades. We had a plan that would have cost about $28 million. Steve wanted to do a plan that cost about $40 million. We were concerned that there had been a lot of development in Harrisburg, but it was all downtown. None of it was getting out to the neighborhoods. And we disagreed with that. Finally, we came to the lease of City Island and the, as he framed it, the baseball team. The problem with the baseball lease was, even though he tried to frame it as a permit, it really assigned an unacceptable level of risk to the city of Harrisburg. You have a facility out there in the middle of the river, which was prone to flood. We were concerned about the city's obligations to move property away from the flood, and if we failed to do that, we had financial risk. We were concerned about all the facilities there and damage. We had to go back and repair them. So our choice was to, after reading the agreement, either take a stand that we couldn't accept this or hide our heads in the sand and just let him do what he wanted to do. From our perspective, our job was to protect the city and the citizens, and we had read the optional charter law, Plan A. We also read all the bond documents, agreements, and we understood that there had to be some sharing of responsibilities with the citizens always being protected, whatever we did. And we knew that we couldn't remain silent on the contract for the senators, especially when we knew better. We had read it. So we filed suit during a re-election period. Probably not the best thing to do. And we understood that. Reed won the election, we lost the election. We accepted that. Finally, the court did come down. Actually, Dauphin County Court decided against us at first. We were not really shocked by that and figured we might have to appeal it to Commonwealth Court to get a truer decision, and we did that. Commonwealth Court came down with a decision in our favor after we were off counsel, so we did have some vindication of the principle, and we stood up for what we thought was right. What is the legacy of that lawsuit? I think it's been twofold. I think, unfortunately, even though the lawsuit exists, for a lot of city councils, there was simply a failure to read the documents about the projects before committing the city. I think that happened with the Incinerator project in particular. I think it happened with a lot of the authority projects. And one of the things that resulted from that, of course, was the discretionary pots of money that the mayor was able to create at taxpayer expense, dip into, and spend any way he wanted to. Those kind of pots of money only exist because the documents create them, state what they can be used for, or don't really provide much detail. If you read the documents, you'll find what's in there. So no one should have been surprised by that. It was there. I think one of the other failures is the failure to apply this contract, the failure to apply the lawsuit to protect council's authority to act on behalf of the city. I noticed that between the transition from the Reed administration to the Thompson administration, the city was stuck with multi-year contracts which were going to cost a lot, and actually those contracts should have been voided. I think someone should have moved to strike those early on. I also saw massive payouts being made to departing Reed loyalists. I mean, some of the numbers of salaries paid in those final days are quite staggering. And again, that's because no one enforced the decision which was made. And one of the things that galls me is when I hear the statement made by some of the administration staff that, quote unquote, the mayor executes contracts, which they then identify with the mayor negotiates, signs contracts, and does everything. And it's clearly in the lawsuit, Moore versus Reed, that was an argument the administration tried to make, that because the mayor executes contracts, he gets to do everything about contract. And that simply is not the case. Third-class city code vests that authority in council, and execution of a contract simply means you sign it. It doesn't mean anything else. I did note that the Moore versus Reed lawsuit has also generated the lawsuit that we'll hear about shortly, but I was also pleased to see it cited in two other lawsuits around the Commonwealth, one in Newcastle and one recently in a Dauphin County case from 2011 concerning payments to the police pension fund, which fortunately the court reaffirmed the fact that council is the body that has the authority to negotiate contracts, and that avoided about $500,000 in additional pension costs for the city. So with that, I will end. I hope I didn't go over. I did forget to set my clock, but I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Reizdan. You were perfect. And we're going to let everyone say exactly what they'd like to say to start, and then we'll move to questions afterwards. Our next guest is Steve Schiffman. Steve Schiffman concentrates his practice in the fields of business, taxation, including business and estate planning and administration, commercial loans, bank asset recovery, and workout and nonprofit corporation law. He also provides counsel in the areas of general litigation, real estate, and personal injury. He's a graduate with distinction of Penn State University and he is currently with the well-known firm of Serratelli and Schiffman. He also, I believe, took this case pro bono and did it because he believed in it. And so to tell us a little bit about the case of Bishop v. Reed and its history, please welcome Steve Schiffman.
At the beginning of my practice, everything was pro bono. So, there was no difference in this one. Reizdan set the background for this quite well, and it wouldn't have happened without his standing up against the mayor. But I take you back to something that was during the second term that you were in office. Remember the Dock Street Dam? The Dock Street Dam was the mayor's idea that because at the time I represented all the sportsmen, and I still do, who were against raising the water level of the Susquehanna River and flooding out 2nd Street. And I remember being at City Council meeting one day when they were talking about the Emmaus Bond Fund, and I cornered Stan Mitchell, and I said, "Stan, this is crazy." And Stan turned around and looked at me and says, "Don't worry, we'll never build it. It's all to arbitrage the funds." And that was the mayor. No matter what he did, he had an ulterior motive on how he was going to get the money to do what he did. And a lot of things he did were pretty good. But I agree, he left the rest of the city untouched a lot of times, especially the poorer sections of town. The 13 individuals came to me to represent them after they had already gotten standing in the first Bishop versus Reed decision that was issued, which was the hurdle that they had to get over in order to have standing. And I don't know, who wrote that? Pat Bear? You did? Wendi did. Wendi did a great job. And we took it, and you're going to find on the table over there, if you want to look at it, the stipulated record that took about 4 years to put together. Wendi and some of the other people down in the check room and finding all the checks that were written, and they're all in the stipulation of the checks that were written for the Warner Hotel and all of the other little odds and ends. But what happened was, and it's one of these, and the reason I bring up the Dock Street Dam, is the sale of the water system to the authority was just a way of getting a hold of money. And it had two things to get a hold of money. One, by selling it and then taking back the $7 million and putting it in his own personal account at PNB, the mayor would created his own special fund that he requisitioned and wrote checks. Didn't go to the treasurer, didn't go to the controller's office. He just wrote the funds to whoever he wanted. The lawsuit was brought. We moved for injunction to stop him from doing it. The mayor alleged that he did nothing wrong. Judge Kleinfelder referred to his contentions regarding plaintiff's request for declaratory judgment totally disingenuous. Judge Kleinfelder, I think, had a good time writing the decision in this case. But he came down to the fact, as Reizdan said, that executing a contract means you sign the contract. The negotiation of the contracts were left to City Council. And the mayor, to the day we argued this case, said that Moore versus Reed was wrong. It was precedent. It was the Commonwealth Court. It was clear. Judge Kleinfelder found it was clear. But the mayor took the money, and then he got City Council, while we were in the middle of the lawsuit, to retroactively approve the use of the funds, which was just horrendous. And that's when when Judge Kleinfelder refused to issue an injunction because it had already been stopped. And this was a quote on page 18 of the decision. He said, "We have no doubt that in making these transactions, the mayor had the best interest of the city in mind. Nevertheless, it is always a serious matter when a city official disregards a judicial ruling and yields to Machiavellian precepts in assuming authority which is not vested in him. And I think that kind of says it all. And the final part that I liked about the opinion was he said, City Council must exercise its responsibilities to appropriate the city's revenues. And then he said, we would add that it is truly commendable in this instance that at least 13 citizens of this city felt strongly enough about the mayor's apparent singular authority over city assets to make an issue of the matter. And then the footnote says, but he doesn't have anything on, cried a little child. Listen to the innocent one, said the proud father. And the people whispered among each other and repeated that the child had said, he doesn't have anything on. There's a little child who says that he has nothing on. He has nothing on, shouted all the people at last, which was the end of the lawsuit. And that's really all I wanted to say. The rest of the people, the plaintiffs who did it, really did it. All I did was help put it in a form that they could win it.
Thank you, Steve. Our next panelist is the Reverend James Bishop. We tracked him down. He no longer lives in the state of Pennsylvania, but got word of the panel and has come. As a result, I do not have a bio, so if you could start by introducing yourself to everyone here, and then please talking about whatever you'd like, whatever aspect you think is most important to tell people about your role in Bishop v. Reed.
Good evening. I spent 10 years in uptown Harrisburg, and I pastored the Camp Curtin Mitchell United Methodist Church. And that name is the result of, at that time, a black African American and European American congregations coming together, and we had gotten involved in a lot of social issues. We were doing quite a bit of social issues, and then I had gotten connected with some other people in uptown Harrisburg, in other churches who were just as interested in doing social issues, and we were developing a housing project and doing some things. And I think as a result of that, that I was then perceived to be somewhat radical. And that at that time, and so one of the things that had troubled us, as has been mentioned, was the fact that there were a lot of positive things that were happening in the city of Harrisburg, but somehow they did not reach persons who were disadvantaged. And we were like really concerned about that, and we did some radical things. And so when this issue came up, I think the reason my name is at the top of the suit is, number one, it needs to have a name. And I think that Steve Reed had this incredible reputation of intimidating people. And we were trying to decide how we might go forth with this suit, and we knew that that if people had certain jobs, and this was the reputation he had, if people had certain jobs, and Steve Reed thought you had turned against him, he could be very vindictive. And we saw many examples of that and we tracked that, and we were trying to figure out how to get around that. And so all of my friends who are here with me remember that I was the radical one. And because I pastored a congregation and none of my income came from anywhere other than that congregation, that I would perhaps be the one person that he could not touch. He tried to, and I drove from Maryland here after conducting 2 worship services this morning, just to tell you, not knowing that I was actually going to be on this panel, that was some of the most fun that I've ever had. Because he tried to come at me through people in my congregation. He's very seriously, he was very seriously an intimidating force, and it could cause a lot of problems. So I think what we decided to do was to try to get somebody in a position that he could not intimidate, so that we could go forth with the suit, and that's primarily how I got involved in it. And I remember part of what happened in 1992, and I do remember very well how intimidating he was. And I was talked into running for mayor, and I can say this now to my friends, please forgive me, but I had no desire to be mayor of this city. And I remember a reporter asking me why I was running, and I said it's an exercise in democracy. And it was just one way that we would use to challenge him and to get some issues out. But I remember, if I just take a moment to share this, when I was running, we were having public forums, and we would walk into a room much like this with people gathered. And I remember the first week I walked in, everybody, especially African Americans, would run to me, shaking my hands like you would somebody you thought might be your mayor. And I was impressed. And then I remember the next week when we walked into another forum, and I walked in, and it was totally the opposite reception. And as I walked in, people were scattering from me as though I had leprosy or something. And my wife and I were trying to figure out what's going on. And I never will forget, we walked in a room like this, and like over in this corner, in the back in a corner, there was Steve Reed standing, watching people. And because of that, they would not shake my hand. But I never was intimidated by him. But I was glad, and I'm proud to this day that the declaratory judgment was actually made after I had left this city also. But I am indeed pleased that I was able to serve this city. My children spent 10 years of their lives here, and we did and still love this city. And I'm proud to have been at least a part of trying to slow down something that we all perceived was going to happen.
Thank you, Reverend Bishop. Our next panelist, Rebecca Myers, grew up in Mechanicsburg, however was connected to Harrisburg through her church, Messiah Lutheran. She lived in Harrisburg from 1982 to 1994, and then again from 1998 to 2006. Her 2 children graduated from Harrisburg High, and Ms. Myers, then known as Rebecca Fox, served on the Harrisburg School Board from 1987 to 1994. Her church, followed by her training and career in social work, instilled a strong sense of social justice and working for a community that works for everyone. People Against Racism, a community group in Harrisburg, provided an important foundation and an understanding for this work. Currently, Ms. Myers lives in New York City, where she attends the General Theological Seminary, and upon graduation next year, she is hoping to be ordained as an Episcopal priest. Please welcome Rebecca Myers.
You'll have to excuse me if my brain is a little bit on a train heading back to New York. I have to catch a train yet and still have a couple more weeks of the semester left. So I'm half in church history and half here. But anyway, thank you so much for having this. It's so good to see a number of people here that I haven't seen in quite a while. I have to tell you that the first reaction, the women down the table here were trying to get people to sign on to this lawsuit. Again, it was 1992. I had been on the school board for 5 years. I had run for re-election, and going through some papers, I found the story that appeared in the paper when I won re-election, and it talks about the fact that I had, in the middle of the primary, gotten off of Steve Reed's team. And he wasn't very happy about that, but that I had won re-election to that. But that had been an interesting time. So again, a number of the other speakers have talked about some of the ways that Mayor Reed operated, and I could tell you story after story of confirming that you'd get things at the last minute. He would have negotiated the whole thing. You were supposed to go along with it. And it just breaks my heart when I think of some of the things that still are robbing our children today in this city. But so at the time I was married to a man, Fred Fox, and he said, don't get on this lawsuit. Don't sign your name. You're already sticking your neck out there. You've done so much on the school board. We just knew that Steve Reed could be very vindictive, and while my job was somewhat protected, I worked for a statewide association. I worked for the Association of Social Workers. Social work has a strong stand in social justice. So again, there were certain things about where my income came from that Steve Reed really couldn't touch. You know, he really, so it was somewhat insulated, but it still wasn't necessarily easy. So he really advised and said, you know, don't do it. Let some others come forward and put their names. So I was really considering that. It was hard. I was thinking, I don't know I'm going to do this. And then all of a sudden I realized that that was really giving my power away to Mayor Reed. And then I didn't want to give my power away. I was angry at that point. I am not giving my power away to somebody else. And I think I called, Wendi up and said, put my name on there. I will do this. But I have to tell you that you did experience various little things. And like I said, I was fairly lucky, and probably, Fred could be insulated some. He was working for the Pennsylvania Chamber. We had a little bit of insulation, I think, but even so, there were things like he gave baseball tickets to all the other school board members but me one year. That's just like so petty and little. It was so funny. But that was a funny thing. But then a couple of years later, when we tried to get a Clear City letter on our home to move, we actually moved to Kansas in 1994. When we tried to get the Clear City letter, we could not get a Clear City letter. Without a Clear City letter, it's very hard to sell your house because the person can't get a mortgage. And things that they would come out and they would do an inspection and they would say, well, a block of your sidewalk is cracked. There were just real petty things. And the realtor I worked with at the time said, I sell lots of houses in the city. Nobody else is getting this treatment. This is because you're on that lawsuit. This is because you've gone against Steve Reed. And I had gone against him as a school board member, but the thing is, in that election, I got the most votes. So it wasn't only that I had gone against him, I had gone against him, and the community had come forth with some power to support the different voice. So he tried whatever he could do to find a way to get at you, and you kind of knew those things were going to come. When I talked to Eric about this, he said, why didn't we listen? Here was a group out there saying that there were some things going on, and why didn't we listen? And a number of us have been talking about this in the last couple of days. What lessons, what can we learn from this? And it really is puzzling, and it's very difficult. Although today when I was talking about this, my son, who's 37 now, was talking about Dock Street Dam and remembered every single detail of the Dock Street Dam and the arbitrage. And he was a kid when this was going on. So it's really interesting, the things that people remember. But I think one of the things that I found in dealing with people, and even myself, was that the city was looking so good from the outside. And you really want to trust somebody. You want to trust that they aren't lying to you, that they are telling you the truth, and Mayor Reed was very, very good at convincing you that he was telling the truth. I happened to catch him in some lies at certain points where I knew what he was telling me was wrong. But if you were just sitting there and you didn't know the people, you would really believe him. He was very convincing. You wanted to believe that. You wanted to believe things were good. So I think that's part of it. You want to believe the best about somebody. I think, too, that there were people who were speaking. I mean, right down the table here are so many other people who put in so much time, and right up here with Dwayne and Reverend Bishop and the city council before us, there were people who were speaking. But in some cases, the people who were speaking, we have educated people and that kind of thing, but I think some of the people who were also speaking were people in the neighborhoods who probably tended to not be as wealthy, to probably be mostly people of color. And I think we still discount those voices, unfortunately. I just don't think we pay enough weight. We have a lot of attitudes about, well, if people are poor or if they're living in certain parts of the city, they must not be very smart, or why do we need to listen to them? So I think we need to all really think about that, because there were people who were speaking and who were saying this city is not working for us, but their voices honestly were discounted, and I think that can still happen. So I think we need to look at our prejudice and our assumptions about people. The other thing I think is that it wasn't just Mayor Reed. Yes, he could be intimidating. Yes, there were a lot of political things going on, but I think that it took a lot of people to make this happen. I think there was a lot of collusion. There were a lot of people who felt like they could work with what was in place to make things work for them really well. And I really believe it took a lot of people at all levels of government, just like is happening today with the bankruptcy. There are people at all levels of government that are colluding to make things happen a certain way. The school district was taken over, and Steve Reed was put in charge of that school district, and a lot of us knew his propensity to spend a lot of money and spend it in ways that didn't necessarily benefit the children, but that was allowed to happen, and it was allowed to happen at a state legislature and by a governor. So all sorts of levels, all sorts of people. So I think people thought, well, it's working for me. I can make this work for me, so I won't speak up. So I don't think, well, as much as there were certain characteristics of Steve Reed that made this worse, I think we all need to look at what happens when we decide something's working for us and forget to ask the question about who is this not working for? Who's not at the table? Who is left out? Who's not being taken care of? And I think that's a harder thing to do. But I really think that's part of it, that we have to look at ourselves. So I think we just need to ask a lot of questions. There were times when groups of us asked questions about who are your friends, how did you get to this point, how did this happen? And we would find all sorts of connections that would lead back maybe to the mayor's office or the mayor's people. So I think that's part of it. We have to take responsibility, ask the questions, ask who is this not working for, and try not to forget that even if it is working for us, it may not be working for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Our next panelist is Pam Parson. Pam has been a city resident since 1981 and was definitively not driven out of town by Steve Reed, nor the fiscally insolvent city government. She continues to live in the same uptown neighborhood alongside the same neighbors she has had for nearly 25 years, who shovel each other's walks, mow each other's lawns, and generally try to look after each other. After more than 15 years working for nonprofits focusing on hunger and housing issues, including the Harrisburg Fair Housing Council and the Central Pennsylvania Food Bank, she left the nonprofit world in 1996 to become a massage therapist. As an organizer and activist, Pam has devoted considerable time to peace, justice, and community service. Please welcome Pam Parson.
To imagine for a moment moving into a vibrant city neighborhood in a small city, and the neighborhood amenities within 2 blocks are a locally owned pharmacy, a dry cleaner, a grocery store, a bar with decent food and live music on the weekends where you see most of your neighbors, especially during a snowstorm. Also within walking distance is a hospital, a dentist, a podiatrist, and lots of doctors. Walking an additional 2 blocks will get you to a coffee shop where most of your neighbors and friends gather on Saturday and/or Sunday mornings. And if you want to go downtown, you just walk to the end of the block and you pick up a bus that about every hour, hour and a half takes you downtown. And that was my neighborhood when I moved to Harrisburg in 1981. When Eric emailed me and said, "Oh, I'm going to give you some time to make some remarks," I thought about, well, what would I say? And I was here yesterday for the Harrisburg 7 event, and Jean Chenoweth, who is a professor at Bucknell during the Harrisburg 7 trial, mentioned the good people of Harrisburg. And that really stuck with me, the good people of Harrisburg. And he talked about the people who came from out of town for that trial, or in some way connected with those events, and how those people stayed because of the good people of Harrisburg. And even those who didn't stay and moved on, their lives were changed by what happened in that trial and the good people of Harrisburg. And I'm sort of like them. And I think a lot of the people sitting on this panel, with the exception maybe of Dwayne, are a lot like them. We came from someplace else, and we ended up staying here because of the good people of Harrisburg. Now, I didn't come very far. I grew up in West Hanover Township in the Central Dauphin School District, which in the 1970s was still relatively rural. And I grew up without close neighbors that had children my age, so I was kind of isolated because I had 2 parents that worked, and any place I wanted to go, I had to be taken there by car. I went to college in Washington, D.C., and I think not unlike many young professionals who are moving to the city now, Harrisburg was where I wanted to live, and it had things that drew me as a young woman. And it was a downtown that had only the spot when I was here in 1981. It wasn't much there. We used to say they rolled up the sidewalks at the dark. And I worked for the Reed team. I remember when Reizdan and Calvin and Jane Perkins ran for city council, and their signs were in my window and in my yard. But so I think my story is not unlike a lot of other people. So I'm sort of uncomfortable with being called famous, as one of my friends mentioned this week on Facebook. She didn't know I was famous. I said, well, maybe infamous is really more like it. And another friend from out of town said that I was her favorite activist hero. And all of that kind of makes me uncomfortable, because I really see myself as an ordinary person who saw that many things weren't right and wanted to do something about it. I think often of the biblical prophet Nehemiah, and that book in the Bible. Nehemiah looked around at Jerusalem and said, this place looks like crap. Like, let's fix it up. And it wasn't just about fixing it up so it looked nice. It was that everybody had a job. Everybody had a part in creating that community. So if you walk away with, if you take nothing from this today, I hope that you will remember that what you see downtown on 2nd Street, which is a whole lot better than it used to be, is not the full story, and that there was a cost in doing that, and that some people paid very dearly, are continuing to pay, and will now in the future pay much for that. And while that is nice, and I do enjoy it, it was primarily designed for people who do not live here. It was designed for the people who come to have a drink, to have dinner, to see a baseball game on City Island. And I enjoy those things too, but it came at a cost. My neighborhood now, all of those things I mentioned, they're all gone. There's been some revitalization of that. I mean, yes, there's a grocery store, and yes, there are some small neighborhood places like Little Amps and Alvaro coffee shop, but it wasn't what it was. I don't have street lights. There's a place on my block where no one wants to park if you're the last one home and it's a night like this, because there's sort of a sinkhole there now, and it takes on about 4 or 5 inches of water, which is right by the driver's seat. So if you park there, you step out into a puddle. The communities of color that Wendi talked about, that Reverend Bishop mentioned, those are the people who have been here the longest, and those are the people who have been continually pushed. Those are the people on whom much of what we have has been built, because that money that built City Island, that money, those checks you see in that book, those were community development block grant monies that could have and should have been used for something else. So that was the price that we paid. And I'm really grateful that Eric put this together, and I'm really grateful for Reizdan and Calvin and James and Jane Perkins and the people who were on council in those early days, as you said, the Reed Team 1 and the Reed Team 2, who challenged the mayor. And I'm grateful for all my friends here, because I'm one of these people, I didn't necessarily count the cost, as some people have pointed out on more than one occasion. I'm like, yeah, sign my name to it. And then I come out and find a boot on my car one day. And I go downtown to pay to get the boot taken off my car, and I can kind of look into the office there, and there's this little sign that says something about selective parking enforcement, and I can see my name on it. So after shelling out several $100s, I get the boot taken off my car. Now, I did want to say that about a year and a half later, I got most of that money back with a letter that said, "Gee, we're sorry, we made a mistake." when we put, we put that boot on your car. Actually, you had really paid those parking tickets some years earlier. But, so I'm still here. And I'm here because I love Harrisburg. I'm not only up here because I love Harrisburg, but I'm still living on Emerald Street because I love Harrisburg and I love the people that I live in that neighborhood with. And that's a neighborhood that's remained relatively untouched in the last 40 years of fancy development. And we're excited if we get street lights and our trash picked up and the snow removed. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Our next panelist is Wendi Taylor. For more than 20 years, Wendi lived on Green Street in Harrisburg. Now retired, she worked as a public accountant, deputy press secretary for the PA Department of Revenue, a project manager, and also a newspaper reporter. As a newspaper reporter, she covered state and local government for papers in Pittsburgh, Scranton, Erie, and Harrisburg. For several years, she was the City Hall reporter for the Patriot News. This experience taught her how state and local government was supposed to work. There was a time when she attended more city government meetings than members of City Council. Here she is, Wendi Taylor.
First, I'd like to thank Eric for putting this program together. 20 years is a long time, and the details that I thought I would never forget, I have forgotten. So I went looking for the lawsuit and all of the paperwork that we had, and I remembered. I couldn't find it, and in its place there was a receipt from the FBI who took all of my files. So I can affirm that there was an FBI investigation, just like Eric had said. What I don't forget is why we filed the lawsuit, and that 13 people stood together and did the right thing. None of us had anything to gain personally from bringing the lawsuit, and in fact, we had some things we could lose. For me, it was just my small attempt to try to make government work the way it was supposed to work. And I, silly me, as a reporter, I always thought truth was really the most important principle. I thought if people knew the truth, that they would make the adjustments. I thought of Harrisburg as a family, that as a parent, you sometimes think your child might be using drugs or having sex or drinking. And sometimes, as a parent, you pursue that and you want to catch them at that, and you want to catch them so that you can correct the behavior and make your child have a better future. But sometimes as a parent, you really don't want to know. Because if you know, that means you're going to have to do something. And sometimes you don't know what to do. And so I kind of think of Harrisburg like that. I think that people in Harrisburg were afraid. They were afraid to live without Steve Reed, and they were afraid of Steve Reed. And when you're afraid, you don't make very good decisions. People were afraid because when they remembered Harrisburg, which was kind of a shabby little town that had no vibrance and no future before Steve Reed. But then, with Steve Reed, you were afraid to confront him because you knew that he would use the power of the police force against you, codes enforcement, and he would use his political clout to get you. And so I think a lot of people didn't want to know. And when I would talk to people about the things that happened in the city, people came down to two things. They would say, I don't always agree with Steve Reed, but he's done a lot for this city. Or, Steve Reed would never do anything that would hurt this city. And the fact is that we've kind of come full circle. When Steve Reed took over, he says the city was on the verge of bankruptcy. And when he left, the city is on the verge of bankruptcy. He loved to quote his building permits. He always started every speech, when I took over, the bankruptcy papers were on my desk. We had the second highest vacancy rate of any city in the United States. And since the Common Era, which was his era, he has so many building permits. I have to tell you that whenever the water system was sold and I found out that the $7 million went into an account that only Reed could spend, I was upset. But I was most upset with City Council. I was upset with City Council, the treasurer, and the controller because they didn't do their job. The previous City Council, as Reizdan was talking about, they were the ones that reined in Steve's power. I mean, when you think about it, Steve Reed wanted to be a dictator. And the only thing stopping him was the checks and balances. That was City Council's responsibility. And whenever they found out about the $7 million, did they do anything? No, they ratified his behavior. So, liking the truth, I started thinking about doing some sort of action and filing a suit. So, the first hurdle we had to get over was the mayor. We were doing this as just private citizens. We had not run into Steve Schiffman yet. So the first hurdle we had to get over is the mayor's attorney filed a preliminary objection saying that we did not have the right to sue, that it was City Council that had to sue because it was City Council's authority that he usurped, not ours. And I'm going to out Reizdan Moore right now. Steve Schiffman, it was Reizdan who came up with the Beaster case, which was a case that said that whenever the person who should sue wouldn't, that the citizens could stand in their stead. And because the most eloquent of all of us was Reverend Bishop. Reverend Bishop, he argued the case in court because we didn't have an attorney. So he stood up there and did a marvelous job. Another attorney, who I will not name because I don't have her permission, helped to get you ready in the basement of your church. And James Bishop went to court and beat 2 attorneys. So, yes, the Lord was looking out for us, I think. So I guess that's about all I'm going to say. I think that's my 10.
Thank you, Wendi. Our next panelist is Evelyn Daniel Warfield. She was a longtime Democratic committee woman in Harrisburg. She worked as a paralegal, earning her certification from Penn State University. In 2007, she retired from state government and moved to Florida. She supported Steve Reed when he first ran for mayor. After his election, she learned that Reed was not who he claimed to be. When he ran for his 3rd term, Evelyn ran against him in the primary. which landed her on the list of enemies. During her 30 years as a city resident, she found that being a citizen of Harrisburg was a full-time job, spending many hours of her own time attending meetings and reading bills and bond documents. Please welcome back to Harrisburg, Evelyn Warfield.
Thank you. I had started out being a supporter of Steve Reed's when he first ran for mayor, and like Eric said, I soon became disillusioned. I really can't but wonder what would have happened if Earl Gold would have won the primary against Reed the very first time he ran for mayor, what the city would look like now. The first time I thought about suing Steve Reed was when Wendi called me to ask if I would join a lawsuit over the sale of the water system. I said, well, I thought it was a good idea. I was just too scared to join. To be honest, I was just too scared, and I tried to talk her out of it. And I thought I had talked her out of it. But several months later, she called me and said she had a lady working to put together the lawsuit. And I said, so you're going forward with it? She said, oh, yes. So I said, well, I can't let you do this on your own, so put me down. So once the lady that was writing the lawsuit had moved back to New England, Wendi and I picked it up and started writing it ourselves. We soon discovered that she had been on the wrong track, so we used her research, but we kind of made a correction on how we thought the lawsuit should go. We went to the courthouse to file the papers, and I remember how scared we were. We went inside and filed the papers. We came outside the office, sat on a bench right outside the office and prayed because we were so scared. We knew things would never be the same for us again. A lot of things happened to us on the way to suing. I was working for a nonprofit whose board president was on the revolving loan fund, which was created from the $7 million. He took it personally that I was suing. I was on the suit. And I soon found myself on unemployment. I guess they thought that would scare us off, but all it did was make me more determined. I spent most of that summer in City Hall doing discovery for our lawsuit, going through tons and tons of paper, finding every piece that I could find to help us win the case. And we really did do this lawsuit for the first year on our own, and we beat 2 lawyers. And I'm very proud of James Bishop for arguing that we had standing because he did a wonderful job and against a panel of, in front of a panel of judges. And we really appreciate what he did for us because he really put together a really great suit. We tried to tell the people who signed on to the suit to make sure that all their tickets were paid, all their code violations were up to date, because we knew he would come after us however he could. And frankly, the Patriot barely mentioned the suit, except to take everything that Reed said as gospel. When we initially filed the paper, when we initially filed the suit, the paper ran a big story talking about how we were enemies of Reed's and that we were crazy and that we were just trying to cause trouble. And when we finally won, they put a little blurb inside mentioning that we had won. I attended many city council meetings and spoke against the retrofit of the incinerator also. I knew it would bankrupt the city. Most of the council meetings I attended did not have any reporters there, or if they were there, they were reading the New York Times during the meeting. After the meeting, they would go up to Reed's office and he would tell them what happened at city council. But he would never, ever lower himself to go to council meetings. He just trusted that council would do what he wanted them to do. We complained about the way the reporter was covering city council, but the paper never really did anything. It's too bad that the Patriot didn't do their job properly, because we also tried to call attention to the retrofit of the incinerator. And I attended most of the public hearings on that issue and tried to get council to vote against it. However, council was indebted to Reed for getting them elected, and ultimately they voted for it, with Linda Thompson voting with Reed. Once the incinerator vote was taken, my husband and I retired and moved to Florida. We were planning on moving out of the city at that time anyhow, because we knew that once that decision came through, that Steve Reed's creative financing was going to come tumbling down, just like a house of cards. I tried to warn people to move out of the city, but they couldn't believe that Reed would do anything to hurt the city. I wish that in this case, I would have been wrong, because it's causing so much pain for the residents of the city. I hope that never again will the people trust so blindly in a politician. If this is the legacy of Reed's time in office, at least people will have learned a hard lesson. I really want to thank Eric for putting this together, because I really didn't know that it had been 20 years. And I'm very proud of what we did with this lawsuit. And I'm really glad to be here to talk about some of the issues that nobody wanted to talk about 20 years ago.
Thank you. And our final panelist to my right is Dwayne Jackson. Dwayne was one of the original 13 and is a late addition to the panel, so you will have to give your biography as well, and I'm going to hand you the mic.
Good evening. As indicated, my name is Dwayne Jackson. It's really interesting to hear some of the stories. Still being a relatively young man, lost some of my memory and some of the details as they had came out. I'll say this to you, the one disturbing thing to me as an African-American male at that time was the idea that I had always been taught that by putting people of color in power, that would somehow create accountability in people, in the community that you serve. It is very disheartening that all of the damage that you see has happened to the city in the last 20 to 30 years really could have been avoided, but people just simply would not listen. And it's very difficult to cry racism and say these other kinds of things when a lot of the people that are actually in the power positions, such as the council people and the school board members, they're all the same color as me. And they allowed this to happen. Reed had a considerable influence over a lot of these individuals because he basically financed many of their campaigns. He just basically told them, I'm going to make you a star. And when he got tired of them going against him or going against his will, he just replaced them. It was just that simple. So it was a little troubling to me because here, I born and raised in the city, live here my entire life. That's a lot of time in sitting those city council meetings and school board meetings, only to see that people really sometimes did not have the best interest of my people at heart. I remember back in '99 when the state legislature gave sole power of the Harrisburg School District to Stephen R. Reed, the mayor of the city. Gave him total control of the school district. Then Wanda Williams was the president of the Harrisburg School Board. She is your current Harrisburg City Council president right now. Many of these people were very loyal to Steve Reed. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that these were bad people or they're mean. I just think when you take people that really are not politicians and you give them power, you cannot expect them to do the right thing. They just wasn't savvy enough. They just allowed for 20 years one man to literally drive the city directly into the ground. You have a city council that basically rubber stamped whatever he wanted them to do and would spend more time fighting you than they would fighting him at decisions that affected people of color and all people in the city of Harrisburg. And it was embarrassing because you really want the best for your city. But here we are, 2012, Over $300 million in debt, the city is. And the school board is doing just as bad, over $500 million in debt. And you got to remember one thing. The vast majority of this district is poverty-stricken people. We allowed our district to be turned into a cash cow for 11 years. And now we're left with the fallout. Yes, I was one of the ones that went to city council when council was prepared to do the vote on the retrofit of the incinerator. I, with other members of the NAACP, actually went to council and told them, don't do this. Do not invest money in unproven technology. It had no history. And as they said, they had to bite the, they had to bite the bullet. And that's where it all started. So I'm just saying this to you. It's very troubling that the few people that did stand up and advocated against what was going on, we were ridiculed. Things happen in our personal lives, to our families, and everything else. It's a terrible price to pay when you go up against the political establishment at times. And the only reason I'm saying this today is because, it's not going to stop. Until we understand that, you get the government that you deserve. And I must say this in closing. It was a reporter from the Patriot News, Mr. Jim Lewis, is the one that broke the story about the $7 million. It was the Patriot, and it was Jim Lewis, and Wendi could tell you. And did a series of articles, I think lasted close to 6 months, pinpointing exactly what happened and how it happened. And the council went right back and ratified everything he did. So, here again, in closing, we need to understand, if we don't invest in our government, then we get the government that we deserve. Thank you for giving me that opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you all. I'm going to try and start a couple lines of discussion around some general themes, and then we will open it up to the audience for general questions. Yes?
Eric, in these settings, very often you acknowledge the presence of our elected officials. Do we have any elected officials here today?
The question is, are there any elected officials here today? Or candidates for running for office? I can't see. Is Rhonda Mays here? On our school board. Carl Singleton running for the 103rd. Can't see who else is here, but okay. Bill Clark running for the 103rd.
I asked the question. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I asked the question because the sitting members of city council are the ones who ought to be here listening to this message.
Well,
I didn't see anybody.
well, what we're going to do, thank you, Lev. What we're going to do is we're going to put this podcast up for public consumption, and we will send it widely, and I will rely on all of you to make sure that our elected officials hear it. One group that is here, and I think we'll start with this, is actually the Patriot News. So I think we ought to acknowledge the fact that they are covering this. And I would like to state that Mike Feely, who along with Jim Lewis was the main reporter on this story, declined an invitation to be on this panel. And I do think that at the start, as Dwayne has mentioned, there was coverage by the Patriot News. And that part of the 20 years that Unkovic talks, and part of the legacy of this case, is that the Patriot ends up falling silent, and nobody seems to pay any attention to what's going on. Also, historically, two other things happened 20 years ago in 1992 after the suit is filed, and both are reported in the Patriot News. The first is that the Dauphin County DA releases an investigative report. The Dauphin County DA at that time being Richard Lewis, current judge, and his assistant William Tully for the county. The report concludes that the mayor did act illegally. He broke the law. He acted outside of his legal jurisdiction. But that they were unable to determine that there was any criminal intent. In other words, he got bad legal advice from the city solicitor, and he didn't know what he was doing, although in the report it says very clearly he broke the law. The other thing that happens is the State Ethics Committee issues a report also, which states that although people had expressed concern about the use of the revolving loan fund to reward campaign contributors, they could find no connection between the money that was given to the campaign contributors and the contracts that were awarded. Now, the Patriot News reports both of those actions 20 years ago, at the same time that the case goes up. And they also produce a series of articles explaining the conflicts of interest between the people that have been awarded the contracts and the campaign and Reed's campaign committee, as well as the conflicts of interest that were beginning to emerge between Reed and all the members of the various authorities, at the time 7 authorities that they cite. So I guess my first question is, where has the press been for the last 20 years? Is one of the legacies of this case, sadly, that just as the people stopped listening, the press stopped reporting? Or do you think it's more complicated than that? Because clearly if we had had reporting, in-depth reporting, even today, there has not been in-depth reporting on the forensic audit or of many of the findings, I think things would be differently. So would anyone just raise your hand if you'd like to comment on the role of the press and this legacy out of the trial. Wendi, go ahead.
So I'm going to speak for the press.
Well, as the former Patriot News reporter.
I happen to believe that the press is very important, and I do take very seriously the responsibility of people from newspapers and the media being there to ask the questions that citizens would ask if they could be there. So I do think that even though it used to be newspapers and the news media for television and radio were really the only game in town. Now there is the internet and there are blogs, and some are really good and some are not. But I think that's kind of a newer phenomenon, and I do think that some of the things would not have happened having to do with the incinerator had the press actually done a better job. That was among one of those fights that I also participated in. Spent 3 years going door to door, going to meetings, trying to get anybody to listen to us about not rebuilding the incinerator because it didn't make any sense. However, at that time, you could not get anything except 2 sentences as you or the opposition said. And it was the same refrain each time. And nobody took the time to actually look at what was being proposed, because if the press would have, it was very simple. The mayor wanted to do a $60 million project, and he wanted to pay $120 million for it. Now, the incinerator couldn't make money. It had lost money for 9 years before they rebuilt the incinerator. They couldn't make any money when the debt was just $56 million. Then it went up to $90 million by the time the deal actually went down. If they couldn't pay their bills with that debt, what made them think that borrowing $120 million to do a $60 million project and then be $210 million in debt, well, that was going to work? And but it seemed like nobody asked the obvious questions. So I do think that it's not just the Patriot, but it was many media outlets that just didn't want to tell the truth for a long time.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
I just have to say that Wendi is being very modest. We keep telling her, Wendi, Wendi, your paper, your paper. Wendi actually at one point started an alternative newspaper. And if it weren't for that alternative Grassroots News Diary, which then Lenora Smith ran for a while, was it the same name?
Grassroots.
Grassroots, it was still called.
No, here's hers with Common Ground.
Right, Common Ground, right. Those alternatives, if you were here yesterday, you remember the Harrisburg Independent Press. Some of those small alternatives that have occurred in the city prior to all the social media actually were wonderful and at least helped us keep connected and helped get the message out, the messages that were unpopular. But if you talk to Ms. Taylor, she will tell you about stories that were refused to be printed when she was a reporter. And I could not believe that. I just thought the press always tried to do investigative reporting and print. And it was only as I got to know Wendi that I learned the politics involved with print media and some of the newspapers. So the reporters at times, maybe not on this story, but other stories, were doing a good job and were trying to be investigative. And then suddenly we're told that story was not going to be printed that way by higher up. And I think that happened in a number of cases. And I want to congratulate the Patriot on their recent Pulitzer and some of the things they did. Even the New York Times acknowledged the amazing work they did on that. But that just wasn't always the case. The stories weren't allowed to be printed. They weren't covered. I think Jim Lewis, after a while, was taken off the mayor's beat. He did all that work, and then he was absolutely, Mayor Reed refused to talk to him. So, but that was a shock to me to learn that they wouldn't print all the stories and the kinds of things that Wendi and others did to try to make sure that the information was out there in some form.
As I was reading through the issues of the Harrisburg Independent Press yesterday as a part of the discussion of the Harrisburg 7 trial, there was an article by a young reporter named Anita Harris that broke the story of a memo that was posted in the Patriot News newsroom at the time from management telling its reporters that they are not allowed to say anything negative about its advertisers. And according to Anita, that raised a lot of controversy at the time, and several people were fired, not because they were following the memo, but because somebody had leaked the memo to Anita Harris at the time. Steve, did you have something?
Just one other thing. Everybody thinks that the water system case is over, but the city is still, and the residents are still paying for it. And if you don't realize what happened when they sold the water system to the authority, they immediately executed a management contract back to the city. And the city every year would then establish its budget, and whatever the shortfall was, your water bill went up to pay for the shortfall. And he'd call it a management fee. And the city of Harrisburg, because it's a municipal water system, is not subject to the PUC's regulation. So, I mean, we attempted to get some people to do that lawsuit, and we couldn't get it funded, we couldn't do it. But every day, every time you pay your water bill, the reason why your water bill and sewer bill is so much higher than they are in the outlying areas is because of the sale to themselves and then the manipulation of the management fee that's not covered by PUC regulation.
And of course, the water system is back up for sale again now as part of the receiver's plan. The second issue I wanted to talk about just generally was a number of panelists made reference to intimidation and a feeling that there were repercussions for speaking up at the time. Did anyone else want to volunteer any specific stories or anecdotes? I know I have many, and I think it's important for the purposes of getting this on the record that perhaps you come forward and give some other examples if anyone would like.
I had only been working for the Pennsylvania Department of Revenue a few weeks, I guess, when we filed the lawsuit. And I got a phone call from the governor's communications director, and he told me that the governor, at that time it was Governor Casey, was trying to create a better relationship with city government, and that I was not doing a very good job in helping, and that it just was not appropriate for me as an employee of the governor to be suing Steve Reed. And I thought, I told him, I said, well, I know that Governor Casey would agree with me if he understood the issue on this lawsuit. And I told him that I would not get off of the lawsuit. And if you needed to fire me, okay. And then he said, well, I'm not talking firing yet. So we negotiated an agreement where I would not be a spokesperson for the group, but that I would remain on the suit. The second thing that happened is about maybe 3 months later, the Inspector General came and said there was a complaint against me that I was using my state equipment and state time to do political activities. And they came and they searched my office and they went through my computer and they brought me in for questioning. And of course, I was not allowed to know who brought the complaint against me. But that lasted for a little while. And the thing about it is you feel guilty, even if you know you didn't do anything wrong, but when people are accusing you of things, you feel guilty. But then I got mad. And I finally found out, somebody leaked to me who had made the complaint. So whenever Richard House, when he was on city council, he came up to me, he said, is it true that you're under an investigation by the Inspector General's office? This whisper campaign. And we were in City Hall, and it gets really echoey in the rotunda area. And I said, yes, Richard, I am under investigation by the Inspector General's office. And if I lose my job, I'm going after their house and their car, and I'm not going to say anything about the city. And, you know, suddenly it was all over. And there was another time whenever the Secretary of Revenue came in and he shut my door and he said, Wendi, I got another call from the governor's office. He said, the mayor said that you were at a meeting and that you were making trouble and this and that. And then he said, I get so many phone calls, and if everything that Steve Reed said you did, you actually did, you would have no time to work for me. And it just kind of became the running joke. Steve Reed invited the Secretary of Revenue to his birthday party that they had in August, which was a fundraiser. And so the secretary wrote me a little note and said, do you want to go in my place? So what that taught me, it was kind of good that early on in my employment that I knew how far Steve Reed could go, because I was very careful about everything I did. I made sure that everybody who I reported to knew exactly what I was going to do before I did it. I made sure I didn't do anything on state time. But it also proved to me that he couldn't get me fired. He tried again and again and again. So he wasn't all powerful. And so that was what I learned.
Thank you. And I'll add, in my experience in the When I first started expressing concern, and actually even before expressing concern, but trying to establish the bookstore at our old location as a space to have public forums and debates, suddenly we were visited by a codes inspector who accused us of stealing electricity. I had no idea, but somehow the meter wasn't working right. Then later on, the day I challenged the city on the advertising signs in Riverfront Park, we had Dan Lepo call us on the phone and say that our house was in the floodplain and that the garage we were building outside had not gone through the proper channels. And of course, we weren't in the floodplain, and I had to produce documentation saying that we were. But there was also another tactic that was used, which is that he offered me and my wife Catherine, I don't think I ever said this publicly, but basically a loan, which we didn't have to pay back. But he basically, unless of course we did have to pay it back, I still have the documentation. He offered us the Midtown Cinema, and there were favorable terms, and we'd only have to pay it back if apparently, we ever were to speak out against him. So there were two tactics. There was the intimidation tactic, but then was the offer that you couldn't refuse. Did anyone receive an offer like that, or a loan offer from the revolving loan fund? Or if not, Pam, you can talk generally about your experiences.
Gee, I don't know anybody who got offered a carrot. I do know we all got kicked off the mayor's Christmas card list. It had other kinds of repercussions. For me, I was president of the church council at Lakeside Lutheran Church at the time, and we had some event at the church in the week or so following the announcement of the lawsuit, when we filed the lawsuit, and it was initially covered by the paper. And I was in front of the congregation talking about something, and then there was a general question and answer session, and a couple of people really said, well, we heard you use church money for this. So I'm not sure where that came from, but I would encounter things like that from time to time.
I remember listening to the stories of intimidation, and I had not been intimidated by Steve Reed. And at that time, 20 years ago, I am very, very much tempered now compared to then, and I had this itch, this incredible itch, since he wouldn't intimidate me, and I would hear these stories. And I remember writing him a letter once, and Wendi had told me a story, one of the stories of the things that was happening to her. And I wrote him a letter, and I remember very distinctly I said to him that he picked on people who he felt were in vulnerable positions, and I dared him to come at me. And I said, I would love a good fight. And he sent the letter back and said, I don't know what you're talking about. And that was the end of that. But I don't have any stories where he actually intimidated me, and I agree with Wendi. He was more of a bully. I remember when I was in school, high school, or middle school, and there was this bully, and I just remember maybe that was a part of my experience that helped me. And I remember I said, I don't gonna let that guy bully me no more, and he had, and so I took him on. I actually physically took him on, and he didn't bully me anymore, and I just really, really wanted to do it. And now he did try, I think, I won't say how much he actually had a part of this, but there were people in my church who would try to get me to be quiet. And there were some attempts, feeble at best, from people in my denomination who were suggesting that I be quiet. And I said, but I'm supposed to be a prophetic voice. And so then that would cause that to to cease. But he was more, I think he could really affect you if it's like a dog. If if a dog senses that you are afraid, then that's when they bite. And I just never allowed him to bite me.
Thank you. I'll make one more general comment and get your reaction, and then we can move to the audience portion. I'll turn the lights out, and I'll come to you with the microphone. We've used up our full panoply on the stage today. My sort of thesis in thinking about this case and thinking about its legacy is that definitively faced with a DA report, a judgment, a second judgment now on the heels of Moore versus Reed and now Bishop v. Reed, the mayor can no longer negotiate and institute contracts without city council's approval. And instead, the deal-making process shifts to the authorities. And that's where you begin to see the massive piling up of debts. Because what happens is a group of yes people are essentially appointed to the authorities. In many cases, people that have received loans from the funds or campaign contributors. And basically, they do the deals that, and are not subject to the oversight of city council. But further to that thesis is, of course, that the mayor directing authorities to do deals is on its face illegal, and a violation of the Municipal Authorities Act, and something which at least I've been calling since 2007 for the Attorney General to investigate, who is the person who is supposed to be investigating the authorities. Would anyone like to comment on the concept of how the debt balloons once the authorities really emerge in the picture? And also, this is sort of the genesis of the Harrisburg Authority. This is what gives the Harrisburg Authority a real reason for being, is the sale of the water system. And if not, you're welcome to talk also. I was going to ask Rebecca, I think she had to get a train, about her experiences on the school board. Was anyone else on the school board other than her? No. So, if there are no comments on that, I will turn the lights up. Yeah.
There is the one glaring example, and nobody can ever explain to me how it happened, which was the sale of Forum Place for 6 and 8 times the value to the city and the authority of what it was, and the collapse of that, and why that never went anywhere. Never understood that. Still to this day.
Well, we'll see if there's commentary on that from the public. All right, now, if you have a question, you have to ask it in the microphone so we can get it on record. Hang on, I'm going to turn the lights up. There were other things I wanted to discuss, but we'll hope that you will bring them up. And we have plenty of time. We're up until late tonight, so we can go as long as there are questions for the panel. We will try and answer them all. One at a time, just raise your hand. I'll hold the mic.
Hey, thanks for making me not think like I was crazy all these years. Wow, yes, finally someone said this. So I have 2 burning questions. You don't have to answer them. But the first one is, I kind of had a hero in all this, and it was Pat Stringer, because she voted against that. And I would love to know what the story is on that. And the other one I'd like to know the answer to is, how much money have lawyers made off of all this advising and not Mr. Schiffman, of course.
Trust me, I didn't.
No, but I can't help but think that there's got to be $100 million worth of debt just due to legal fees. Is that possible? Or am I only get my information by reading through the lines?
Well, let's start with heroes. Let's recognize Pat Stringer, who's right here, the only city council vote against the incinerator. But panelists, are there heroes that you would like to point out or recognize that you feel, people in addition to yourselves who spoke out and bravely stood for change at a time when it was not popular. This would be a great chance to recognize them if anyone would like to put forth a few names. Go ahead, Reizdan. Go ahead.
I'll just add some of the members from the first two councils, Bill, Stan Mitchell, Lenore Smith, Harriet Braxton, myself. I think that they were there to oppose the mayor, not for the purpose of simply opposing the mayor, but to try to do the right thing for the city. And I would mention them.
Actually, I have a story that I heard from Jane Perkins this morning, and she mentioned to me that when the sale of the water system was on the table the very first time, that she took a busload of people up to DeHart Dam to actually see, because when you're talking about the water system, it's hard to visualize that it isn't just what comes out of the tap or the pipes that are under the ground, but it actually comes from that reservoir in Upper Dauphin County, and that she took a busload of people up there and a lot of press up there initially to take a look at it.
Anyone else? All right, and okay. Hold on one second.
Yes.
Yes.
That would be one.
The departed Charles Schiffman from the NAACP was also part of that group.
Bill, would you like to address the second part of the question, which was the amount of money that went to lawyers as somebody instrumental in the forensic audit? I know you've looked at those numbers associated with the incinerator debt, and I know you've commented on the fact that an awful lot of the money didn't go to the incinerator, but instead went to professionals. Can you quantify that for us?
In August of 2010, Neil Grover, am I not coming? Can you hear me? August of 2010, we had a panel discussion here on how we got into this, and we have a chart listing the role of the law firms in every financial transaction involving the authority and the incinerator. It's millions of dollars. I don't have a specific amount, but it's the preeminent law firms in the city, some of which who's a partner in a particular law firm was the chairman of the Harrisburg Authority. And when the Patriot News reported on his conflict of interest for his law firm doing legal work, the firm sent their public relations people to the publisher of the Patriot and threatened to pull the advertising. And you haven't read anything about that law firm or that person in about a year and a half now, have you? I have some quick comments. The Emmaus General Authority, by coincidence, their bond counsel was my good friend David Unkovic. The practice of the suburbs paying more for their water has stopped. Mr. Unkovic put a stop to the city taking money from the water fund and putting it into the general fund to balance the budget. Unfortunately, it means the city's got a real problem this year. That will be taken care of, and all I can say is we're not selling the water system. The RFP is for private operator, which may or may not happen, but it's not being sold. The best line when I read Jim Lewis's series, and kudos to all of you for being there in the past, and kudos to Eric for putting this on the record. Everybody who lives in Harrisburg needs to hear what all of you said today, because when the national media comes to me and wants the background, how could this guy be in office 28 years? Where was the local newspaper? There was a quote from Frank D. Garcia when he found out that the mayor had spent $7 million on private business throughout the city. He said, it's like giving your wife the credit card. And that's how he treated it. And I remember Tony Perry had a column in the newspaper that was very upset about that. That's the way that city council treated the mayor. And then they ratified all of his decisions. As for the Patriot News, all I have to say is they have written one article on a 133-page forensic audit that cost $1.1 million for a team of incredible professionals to uncover what happened, what you allegedly stopped, never stopped. The mayor had his own view of the law. He did the CIT deal without city council approval. And all of these transactions, the guarantees of the incinerator debt, the assertion that the debt was self-liquidating, we have determined was false, that there was false statements made to the state. The state has done nothing. The Attorney General has done nothing. The current district attorney has done nothing, and the official at DCED who oversaw this process and signed off on it resigned last week. Now, I do know the U.S. Attorney has the forensic investigation, as does the SEC, and hopefully all of your hard work will be vindicated, because I'm not going to rest until these people are put behind bars or their law firms and financial advisors put up the hundreds of millions of dollars they need to pay back so that we don't have to pay for their mistakes. Thank you.
No. Okay, hold on one sec. Would anybody like to comment on that, or shall we go to the next question? Hang on one sec. Okay.
I kind of would like to comment.
Okay.
One of the things that happened with the incinerator often is if you looked at the refinancing of the debt that happened every 2 years, and so like every 2 years, the incinerator would need like $5 million in improvements, but then he would borrow $8 million, and like $2 million would be to plug the hole in the city's budget. $5 million would be for what he wanted to do, and $1 million would be the bond costs. And it worked like clockwork. That is how, whenever the incinerator got closed down, that we owed $90 million on it when it was worth nothing. And I think that's really the deal with why did Reed do something he knew wasn't going to work. He wanted to hide the fact that he had an asset that cost $10 million originally. Okay, the incinerator, when it was brand new, cost $10 million. And how did something that can't work have $90 million in debt against it? And he was afraid of that debt. He knew that it was going to cost it was going to cost money to pay down that debt unless he had some kind of revenue to offset it. And I think that's how it all started out. But every time they would work the numbers, they realized that you had to borrow more in order to even have a prayer of it working. When it got so ridiculous that even the insurance company realized that it wasn't going to work. And that's why they made the county back it with the full faith and credit of the county. That had never happened. Never. And it should have been a red flag to the county that this is a bad deal. It should have been a red flag to the city. This is a bad deal. DCED, the Department of Community and Economic Development, had all of the paperwork from all of the debt that had ever been issued out of Harrisburg, and they should have known it was not self-liquidating debt. Evelyn went and tried to sue over that. She raised the issue with Mr. Howard Stewart, trying to say you can't actually approve this. This isn't self-liquidating debt. And the first time they did a bond deal when they sold the incinerator to the Harrisburg Authority, there was no price in it. How do you sell something when you don't know the price? But everybody just checked it off. The controller didn't say anything. The treasurer said nothing. Nobody said anything. They just said, okay.
Evelyn, could you talk about your suit? Self-liquidating and what should have been known to be self-liquidating or not seems to be a major issue now. What years were you pushing forward with that?
It was after we filed this the lawsuit with the water system, and we had gone to DCED with numbers that showed that the numbers that Reed was purporting could never, ever possibly be true. And DCED looked at what we had and said, well, we may have a good case, but we were in the wrong venue. We needed to file a lawsuit. And I said, well, we're already in a lawsuit, and I don't think we can afford to file another one. So that's what happened with that. But they pretty much admitted that.
Oh, I didn't know that.
it was right.
I can tell you as late as 2007, when I resigned from the authority, I tried to tell everyone who was listening that it was not self-liquidating. It was completely obvious to everyone, as the forensic audit has shown by 2007, that no one in their right mind could possibly consider it. There were no numbers that showed it to be. I took that information to the FBI at the time, and they had my complaint. But I think the fact that it wasn't self-liquidating and that people knew it going all the way back into the 90s is incredible. Next question, we'll get to people. Yep. 90.
Let me think.
93?
Well, one thing you can do is if you email me that information afterwards, I'll put it up with the podcast and we can clarify the date.
And I also have to
Yep.
say that the city, that the Harrisburg Authority never paid the city the money for the incinerator.
That's true.
And I brought that up during a city council meeting, and Bob Kroboth had to admit that no, in fact, the incinerator had never been paid for.
Oh, boy.
I just wanted to ask if people who comment or ask questions could identify themselves, particularly if you have history with this. It's of interest to us who may not know how you were related to hear that.
Okay, let's see. Well, that was Bill Cluck with the Harrisburg Authority. And I think that was everybody who said something so far. But from here on out, we're going to raise names. And what is your name, sir?
I'm Glenn Heisey. I'm a resident of Harrisburg.
Okay, great. I saw a hand over here. Yep. This would be Pat Stringer, former member of City Council who voted against the incinerator.
And the only member of City Council I know that had to run in a special election to get on City Council. I just wanted to make a comment concerning, as you say, intimidation. It was Valentine's Day. The year was 2003, and I had gotten a call from the FBI. And they said they wanted to interview me, and I couldn't imagine what would the FBI want to interview me about. Well, I went with my attorney to the federal building, and we went up and we met with one of their agents who was out of the Baltimore office. And they wanted to interview me about what did I know about the Harrisburg School District missing computers. I didn't work for the school district. I have no contact, no involvement whatsoever. But I think this was some sort of intimidation. Why did they pick me out of everybody else who could have been on the school board or who lived in the city? The only thing I was a member of council. I knew nothing about the computers that were supposedly missing from the school district, but that was, I believe, a thing of intimidation. And to this day, I believe that while I was on council, my phone was tapped.
And if anyone listened to the panel yesterday, I think looking to the FBI as our savior in this matter is perhaps concerning. To this day, I feel that the FBI took a lot of information that I gave them and had no intention of really doing anything with it and are as political as any other group. Yes, sir.
I have a meeting that I have to go to, but I just wanted to say that the last question Judge Kleinfelder asked me in the argument in this case was, you know, it's all taken care of now, why are you doing this? And I said to him, I said, well, maybe the next time the mayor wants to buy some bullets, we can get an injunction to stop it from happening. And of course, then the Wild West show showed up.
I have,
Wow. Thank you, Steve Schiffman.
Steve, I came across the last bill that Steve Schiffman sent us that he comped for us, and it was $10,000 that he gave this city.
All right, I see lots of questions. Hang on. There's still plenty of panelists remaining. Bill Kiesling.
Hey, now I had a question for a resident, Bill Kiesling. So actually, Eric gave me a book, and the Kiesling Reed thing goes back, I think you know. And I've often wondered what would, well, I think resident knows he's a founder of Harristown. you know, when Steve took over, it was nothing but
First Chief of Staff for Governor Casey.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So there's some history there, which is interesting to me. But I had a question about the budget, but all this repercussion stuff and intimidation, I just wanted to say that I ran into, you know, we used to work with Randy King during the 3 Mile Island incident. We knew him, we hung out with him. And at some point in the 80s, he came to me and he said, "You're the enemy." You know, I've talked to other people about this. He said, "You're the enemy." And I said, what do you mean, Randy? But the point is, everybody turned into these guys' enemies, you know? But a crazy thing happened. I got onto the governor's ballot in 1998 just to talk about reform issues with Governor Ridge. And I got a call from, who was head of the NAACP then? Chavez was his name?
Chivas.
Does that ring a bell? Great guy.
Chivas.
Chavez, great guy. And if anyone remembers, they were going to incinerate infectious waste or something. Do you remember that? Yeah. So he said, "Would you be willing to use part of your, you know, time at forums to talk about this?" I said, "Sure." So I show up election day to vote at the polls, and Reed had sent this goon down there to challenge my right to vote at the polls, you know? So I thought, that's pretty low life, you know? And people at the polls were saying, "Let the guy vote, for crying out loud," you know? And then another time, there was a woman at Children and Youth here at the county, and actually a child was being threatened by a family member of this Children and Youth person. And I called the cops. They didn't do anything. You know, it was strange. And a couple months go by, and Randy comes to me and says, "Oh, we heard you called the police," you know? And like they kind of snickered about it. And I thought, boy, if this child had been hurt, you know? So, you know, it was just low-life stuff. But my question to you is, I seem to remember in the 70s when I was at HIP, that the entire city budget was only maybe $12 million. What was it then? And obviously now we're talking about how it's been pumped up by all this artificial money. But, you know, can we get a grip on the numbers? What was the budget that the city was operating when all this started? What is it now?
I don't know the answer to the question, first off. I wasn't here in the 70s. I came to Harrisburg in 78. Seems to me the budget might have been about 28,000, and I'm gonna guess that was somewhere between 78. Million. That was like 78 to 80. What it was when we left, 89, I'm gonna guess it may have doubled.
And today?
I don't know what it is today.
So again, what did it start at? You think? Would we say around 24?
Yeah, I think so, 24, 28.
So it's really been pumped up by all this artificial money.
Yeah, Steve Reed was always one of those people who believed in getting an idea and going ahead with it. It didn't really matter whether or not it made sense. He never really looked at the disadvantages or the downside. As long as it seemed like a good idea, he would do it. So a lot of times he just spent money. And he spent money without really trying to find the cheapest way to do it, realizing it was taxpayers' dollars, or even looking at the cost-benefit analysis.
Thank you, Reizdan. I see one of the heroes who was mentioned by Reizdan has just arrived. So if she would like to say something, Lenore Smith, would you care to reflect on anything?
There's an empty seat.
All right.
I actually came here to see Wendi, Pam, and Evelyn. That's the only reason why I'm here, to say hi to them. I don't want to say.
Okay, that's fine. No problem. We will go to the next question. All right. Yep.
My name is Mike Grabowskis. I was a resident in the downtown and Midtown for almost 30 years. And I was number 14 or 15. And I think, Wendi, you asked me, or Rebecca. It was after you guys were established, but you were looking for a few more to sign on. And the one thing I remember that Evelyn, I think it was Evelyn, reminded me of, we were in the church basement where I got to meet everybody. And all of you said, "Do you have any parking tickets? You owe money and taxes?" And it was drilled into my head so much. And I was young and impressionable at the time, and I'm glad you did, because once I signed on, my life, went south at that point. I lived and worked in the city, so my life was here. It wasn't outside. And I mean, up until just a few years ago, I'd be stopped at a red light, and cop cars would surround me, and they'd say, "You went through a red light," and I would say, "How is that possible? the red light's there, I'm here. And I'm given a ticket that I had to fight, or just ridiculous things. My car was booted I don't know how many times outside my house, and I had no tickets. I mean, you know, one time the water was shut off. It was absolutely ridiculous. And I was a very, well, I was a minor player as far as paperwork went. But I worked on Reizdan, I remember working on your campaign and working with a lot of the people that in office. And I was always in the background and I knew everybody. The other thing that impressed me is why I wanted to even say anything. When I did meet all of you, one of the reasons I wanted to be involved, I knew Rebecca and I go way back to when we were teenagers, so I knew and had talked to her. You were all just ordinary citizens. You were from every background, walk of life, economic, education. You were citizens, and it hit me so strong. If that group of citizens who were as diverse as you could get believed that something was going wrong in the city, it was going wrong. And it needed to be done. And I think what has unimpressed me is in the last 10 years of his presidency, where was that? I mean, a lot of us tried to, you know, but it just seemed like it wasn't the same. And there were people, obviously, who were trying. But I think it's because he found the authority and other ways to hide some of the stuff that you guys were lucky enough to dig up that now couldn't be traced. He made sure there was that missing link, and that's where you guys succeeded. And then all of a sudden he said, well, I have to be a little bit more clever this time. But thank you, all of you, again, for putting your necks out there.
Thank you. Okay, we're coming around. We've got time for a few more questions.
I have a question for Wendi. Can you cut to the chase and give us the names of the people who are responsible? Can you name the names of the people?
Responsible for?
For, I guess, for our current incinerator problem.
Well, there was Dan Lisby, who put the project, you know, it was his job to get the project through the approvals. Andrew Giorgione, who did a lot of the bond work. Whenever we appealed the incinerator permit at the Environmental Hearing Board, he was the attorney for that. Every penny of debt against the incinerator was proposed by Steve Reed. If the 3 county commissioners had not approved the backing with the full faith and credit of the county, that deal would never have happened. You had Carol Kacharis, who was the bond counsel. It was her duty to protect the bondholders. I don't think they feel particularly protected. Jim Losty was one of the bond underwriters. He always talked about the future value of money.
You shouldn't forget the previous members of the Harrisburg Authority Board, Fred Clark.
Oh, yeah.
Leonard House, Tom Mealy, former executive director, Keller, and Trent Hargrove.
Well,
and also, very importantly, Bob Crowbaugh, who seems to be completely held unaccountable and continues to this day to manage the city's finances.
I think, you know, because I knew some of these people for a very long time, I feel kind of sorry for some of them, because they were kind of young and impressionable, and I don't think they really understood what they were doing. I think Tom Mealy left because he couldn't deal. I mean, it actually made him sick when toward the end, he just couldn't do this anymore. And I believe that Tom Mealy actually left some documents on the table for us. We had gone to do a public records search, and you had to put it in writing, and then they had to make an appointment, and you had to, they made it very complicated. But one day we were in there for a public records search, and we said we wanted to see certain things. But when we went there, on the table were all these wonderful documents that we knew they really didn't, that they did not want us to see. But Tom Mealy, I believe, had arranged for that to be there, which I always appreciated.
Yeah, I'm coming. Yep, hold on.
Add to this. First of all, the purpose of the authority is so that any authority is so that the city's finances, that debt level that cities are supposed to have, the whole purpose of an authority is to get out from under that. And so what you had was all of these rubber stamp councils who should have been asking the question, if you need the full faith and credit of the city, then that is clear that it's not going to pay for itself. Because otherwise you wouldn't need the full faith and credit of the city. So you had, 20 years of rubber stamp councils. And, I think all of us in this room have to be responsible for that, because we all, a lot of you guys, we were considered the stepchildren, but a lot of the people in the city just bought into this great thing. That's all of our faults. It's not really just those names. We all have to bear some responsibility for that.
But you also have 20 years of rubber stamp authority board members who are supposed to be independent, and you have deals and transactions which are not able to be vetted by the public because they're being hidden through the authorities. I will testify to the fact that Tom Mealy left a lot of notes behind and had a habit of writing notes in the Harrisburg Authority files pointing to things that he was uncomfortable with, yet he's never gone public. He did testify in the SIT transaction, but he's never, was he deposed? But he's never come forward to say what he needs to say, and he should, as should anyone else, and we ought to see to it that that happens. Okay, more questions.